Hello, my good friends, my dear audiences. Welcome to the show. At East West, Jack Zhao hosting the show with G&E TV. Every time when something happens or something is happening or had happened already, I try to, as much as possible, bring some professional analysis for your information. Today, in the analysis of the Iraqi situation, I have invited my good friend, Mr. James Lee, the founder and the CEO of Lee Strategy, and to come in join the show. But before that, I would have to once again emphasize that Mr. James Lee is not a regular Joe or average Joe. He is one of the top guns. He was once involved with the Bush Presidential Advisor Board, and he is namely an advisor of President George H.W. Bush 41. And later he joined the governor team for Governor Bill Wilson, right? Governor Bill Wilson joined his election team and won election and named as the spokesman for Governor Bill Wilson. So that kind of that background portrays you as somebody coming from at least we can hold on to some professional answers or analysis. Thank you for the show.
Well, it's good to be here, Jack. And obviously, when it comes to Iraq, I'm not really sure that there are any real professional opinions out there, but we'll certainly give it a shot.
All right, very good. Well, I would like to get a general picture about what's happening in Iraq.
Well, I think, for your viewers, the thing you have to understand about Iraq is that Iraq and Iran are the only two countries in the Middle East that have a Shiite-dominated majority.
I see.
Most other countries in the Middle East are Sunni, and that's the basic schism in Islam. There's a Sunni and there's a Shia branch. In Iraq, after the United States pulled out, the Shia government was supposed to enter into a power-sharing agreement with the Sunni minority population, which was the dominant group under Saddam Hussein. So they were the party in power for a long time.
Okay.
Unfortunately, Nouri al-Maliki, the prime minister, didn't do that. And in response, there was a lot of resentment and there was a lot of opposition from not just the Sunni minorities in the north, but also the Kurdish minorities and the spillover of fighters from the Syrian civil war. After Syria kind of got the upper hand in the fighting up there, a lot of those Shia fighters were pushed out of Syria and they were pushed into Iraq. Well, they saw an opportunity to whip up the sentiments of the Sunni tribal leaders there and join forces to basically take back territory and force the Maliki government to make concessions and hopefully to actually topple and get a change in government.
Okay. If the Shiite and the Sunnis, or probably the Kurds, are for the power though, what does it have to do with the ISIS?
Well, ISIS is a relatively small splinter group of Al Qaeda. So they're
strong.
Well, it's relative. They're a terror group that is extremely violent, extremely barbaric, but they're not especially large. But they get the lion's share of publicity because they are extremely brutal. And because they frankly are very good at PR. They're out there on social media, they're out there with their own press operations taking credit, even though they don't represent the majority of the fighters involved in this fight. But they've been very good about positioning themselves. In fact, today, they announced that they had created their own caliphate, their own Islamic nation carved out of northern Syria and northern Iraq. No one really, believes it, and no one really takes much stock in it, but they're very good at positioning themselves as the power, even though they're not relatively very large.
So they wanted a piece of pie at that too, right?
Well, ISIS wants to declare their own strictly run Islamic state. It's probably never going to happen, but they're very good at positioning themselves in the media spotlight because of how violent and how brutal they are.
All right. Lots of people started to blame the war. Do you think that's a consequence of the war?
Well, I think the general consensus is that one of the major stumbling blocks coming out of the war was that when President Obama failed to negotiate a status of force agreement with the Iraqi government, whereby the U.S. would be able to leave forces behind to safeguard and train Iraqi forces, that created a vacuum, a power gap. Because once all U.S. forces left Iraq, we pretty much left the Iraqis up to their own devices. And now we're finding ourselves in a position where the Iraqi military was not prepared enough, not supported enough, and not advanced enough and sophisticated enough to fight off, these insurgents. And now, we're back having to send military advisors there. So there's a very, very real danger of the United States having to be slowly dragged back in and mission creep. It starts with 300 advisors, then another 500, then another 1,000, then air support, then military combat. It's a bad situation to be in.
It has to be stonewalling.
Well, it's possible. I mean, the hope that everybody has is that Maliki will step down, that there'll be a new government formed that includes the Sunnis, and thereby once you have a Sunni-Shia unity government, they can turn on ISIS and push ISIS back out and return Iraq to its status as an independent nation. The other problem that we have here in Iraq is the influence and intervention that Iran has brought into the play.
Oh yeah, they're ready.
Yeah, Iran is the other major player at the table here because Iran desperately wants Maliki to stay in power because Maliki is Iran's puppet, for lack of a better term, and Iran really is trying to preserve the existing power structure so they don't lose control over the Shia government.
Of course, there are people agree that the war is legit, and the only problem is that the war ended too soon before we could successfully train the government forces. Do you think that's a comment?
Well, I think the most valid criticism that came out of the invasion of Iraq and the post-war reconstruction was that the Bush administration, after they had a brilliant plan for invading Iraq, they didn't have much of a plan for what to do with Iraq afterwards.
All right.
So there was kind of like this thinking that pervaded the Bush administration that once you free the Iraqi people, they would automatically embrace democracy and they would know how to function. It's the same kind of belief that happened in Russia after the fall of the Iron Curtain. And you saw what happened in Russia, a much more stable population, but had a very difficult transition to democracy, and some would argue that they never did because now Putin is running it like the old Soviet Union. But it's for a people that have never experienced democracy, don't have any training with it, it's very difficult to make the transition to actually operate in a true democracy. So Iraq is really struggling right now because there is not the type of civil infrastructure and political infrastructure that can empower people to control their own destinies.
It is still confusing, though. Okay, with the government force being mostly Shiites, right? Understanding that the Sunnis want the power. So why wouldn't they put up a fight?
Well, I think the Sunnis understand that they're not going to be able to run the country like they did under Hussein because they're the minority. There are more Shia in Iraq than there are Sunnis. But the Sunnis want a piece of the political pie, a piece of the economic pie, and a piece of the action, so to speak. The problem here was that the Shias just shut them out. And so when you try to unilaterally take control of a country and essentially cut out all the minority groups, then there's going to be a problem.
Yeah, exactly. They did cut them out, and yet they kind of coming on the rise, though, coming back for the power, though. Why wouldn't they put up a fight? They just retreat after retreat after retreat.
Well, part of it is that the Sunnis have a better base of experienced military officers because the vast majority of Sunnis served in the Iraqi military. Shias didn't.
Were they trained by Russians?
The Iraqi army?
No, I mean Sunni.
The Sunnis?
Sunni
yeah,
forces,
the former Iraqi army,
yeah.
a lot of the Sunni officers were trained by the Russians.
By the Russians.
Yeah, and there a lot of them were the original officers that we fought against in the two Gulf Wars. So they have a fairly deep military level of experience, combat experience. The Shias, however, really don't have that kind of top level leadership, and so when the Sunni insurgency started, led by ISIS, it was very, very difficult for the Shias to organize and effectively fight this type of kind of battle.
All right, all right. So let's take a short moment now. When we come back, we'll keep finding out more from Mr. James Lee, please.